Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How you guys doing, man? How you guys doing?
All good, all good. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you fine. Jake has not really said
Yeah.
much, so I can't really comment on that one.
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you, man. How you doing? How you doing, my brothers?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Good, alhamdulillah, not bad. How are you?
Yeah, subhanallah, man. It's strange that these sort of weekly roundups they come around quite quick, obviously every week, but it just seems like so much happens in the week. If you weren't gauging it like we do on a weekly basis, there's a good chance of missing loads of this stuff. But yeah, good stuff, man. Good stuff. Good to hear you guys are well as well. And listen, before we start, there's a comment now. You know how stereo works. That some of the last time we had an intro music by someone, but it's probably worth playing it. Should we go for it? What do you think?
Yeah,
Go for it.
All right, let's be surprised.
Hey, assalamu alaikum. I hope you guys are well, and yeah, I'm gonna be here listening to you guys. So best of luck.
Cool.
Wa alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum salam. Yeah, we have our first listener.
Yeah, sure. Subhanallah, man. Wa alaikum salam. Yeah, jazakallah khair if you're here listening, and hopefully you'll find this an interesting session, and feel free to participate as well. So inshallah, let's get into it, guys. What do you think? Should we go into it?
Go for it.
Go for it.
You guys ready to rumble? Yeah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff. Okay, so what we're gonna start first segment, and you know what? It just so seems that French President Macron, he seems to be quite a regular on our show, because I'm sure, to be honest, in the last month or so we've covered quite a few sessions with him being involved. But okay, so the news story which has kicked off in the past week, and actually, you know what? It's ironic, it's hilarious, it's ridiculous, but it's really good to get your thoughts on it as well. Is that what we have? Macron, Emmanuel Macron, of France, the president of France, and he's having a bit of a difficult time at the moment, and things didn't go well. Where there was a billboard which was depicting Macron as Hitler. So what does Macron do? Does he turn the other cheek? Does he ignore this? No. What does he do? He sues the billboard owner for depicting him as Hitler, and he was really disgusted by this picture of him. Right now, this is the ironic bit, because I'm sure you guys will mention about his views on other people insulting other people, and actually defending that. But what we see is that Macron not too long ago was defending the Charlie Hebdo caricatures, or the images depicting the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we know that this was something he defended. He defended freedom of expression and all this sort of stuff. And a lot of people now are pointing a finger by saying, actually, this is a bit of double standards here. On one hand, when the Muslims were being offended in France and while around the world by disgusting depictions and so-called images of the blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was there as a champion of freedom of expression. But now that he himself is being depicted as Hitler or being attacked, he actually has gone as far as suing the person behind this. What are your thoughts on this, guys? What are your thoughts?
It's funny, isn't it? Whenever Islam enters the scene, falsehood becomes so much more apparent. Is my first opinion on this kind of thing. The funny thing is, his quote back in 2020 is so ironic based on this. He actually said, there is in France a freedom to blaspheme, which is attached to the freedom of conscience. I am here to protect all these freedoms. In France, one can criticize a president, governor, and blaspheme. That was his quote. And how ironic it is now that not only is he suing or trying to sue this owner. The guy who did the billboard, by the way, he owns these billboards. He owns many billboards in France, in the south of France. So it was interesting. He used it as an opportunity to get a political message across, because obviously he felt that France's or Macron's policy towards vaccinations was very authoritarian. And so he used it as a, like you say, as a freedom of his expression and freedom of speech. But how convenient that just because he doesn't, this isn't something that is within, what they want people to say, they've got a problem with it, to the extent that not only is he trying to sue him, he came out saying this is the equivalent of hate speech. So not only is the caricature now not just a caricature, it's hate speech. So then when you compare it with these disgusting depictions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it highlights, doesn't it, that those are things we genuinely people see as blasphemous, because we see that, showing pictures, talking negatively towards people's religions, towards the creator, all of these things people recognize as blasphemy. Yet when it came to them doing these things and putting these disgusting images up on government buildings, remember, this wasn't just this wasn't just individuals doing this. This was a state level or acceptance that this type of so-called satire of depicting religious figures was completely okay. Yet now it's not okay to do the same with a leader of a government. It just goes completely, the hypocrisy is like some next level, really. So
Definitely, man.
that's my opinion, is just both ironic and very hypocritical.
JK, what are you saying, man?
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore, to be fair. It just shows the hypocrisy and the Western hypocrisy that these guys portray. Like, it's quite interesting that he was depicted in this way, because he himself found it quite insulting, because obviously it's him. But when it comes to a character or a person that 1.8 billion people in the world look up to, and as a prophet, there's no problem at all with it. And for me, really, it highlights the kind of fallacy of freedom of expression, and all their freedoms, really. Like, for me, they use freedom when it's convenient for them. So when it comes to like Rash was saying, that to insult Islam and to insult the Muslims, they bring out the card of freedom of expression. They should be allowed. We're in a liberal democracy. Then no one should be offended, and even if they are, they should be allowed. This is kind of what's the word? It backs, it's their liberal framework that they live by. But when it doesn't work in their favor, they crack down on it, and they sue people and things like that. And like, it's interesting he called it hate speech. So if this is hate speech, then what was the Charlie Hebdo cartoons being depicted on the state buildings? But the point I'm trying to make is that as Muslims, we should recognize that freedom doesn't actually exist. Freedom, even they say it themselves, freedom has its limits. But in the if you think of freedom as a concept in it by itself, there should be no limits. It should be constant, and you should accept anything that it brings. But we know, not just in freedom of expression, but in anything, they seem to crack down on anything that doesn't agree with their system. So it's not freedom, really. It's essentially anything that agrees with what they say and is liberal is okay, and anything that isn't is not okay. Very similar to the discussion we had last week, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, about the clothing. So when it comes to dressing half naked and showing all your kind of body on everything, it's okay and it's fine. But when it comes to Muslim women wearing the dress, it's not okay. And clear comparison even with the fact that they mandated masks, but when it comes to someone wearing the hijab in the workplace, it's not allowed. So the point I'm really making is that they use these kind of values, the freedom values, freedom of expression, freedom of ownership, these things, to their own favor. It's not a like, even if we don't believe it or agree with it, it's not even a what's the word? They're not consistent. So as Muslims, we shouldn't say that we want freedom Actually, this just highlights that freedom doesn't exist, and they're just being hypocritical, as Rash was saying.
Yeah, I think like you said, JK, what it does do is it shows the sort of weakness in the concept of freedom of speech or expression. Because from a human point of view, from just from human nature, we see that there are things that people can say, there are things that people can't say. I mean, yeah, it's just normal if somebody was just insulting your mother or whoever it was. It's human nature actually to try to do something about it. You wouldn't just say, well, you're entitled to say what you want. So this is just another sign of the weakness of this concept of freedom of speech, because like you said, it's not consistent. If it was consistent, then you should be able to apply this wherever. And why is it there are certain issues where you can't speak about them, or you can't question certain historical events that have happened, and in some countries you could even be sent to prison for questioning these type of things, right? So really, if there was the issue of freedoms, and even people who promote the harm principle, that you have freedom until it harms someone, but even the scholars themselves couldn't agree on what was harm and what wasn't harm. So it just goes to show that when man is the one who tries to set the limits, it's never going to be consistent, because humans are different in the way they think, they're different in the way they experience things. Their backgrounds are different, and what they decide is what's right and wrong, if it was left to them, would be different. It wouldn't be consistent. Hence why, as Muslims, we believe that there's a creator who has created humans, who's created all of the universe and all of life, and he's the one who's in the best position to be able to decide and dictate a system which will organize man's life, his relationship with himself, with others, and with the creator himself, because he's the one who is the creator. So it really, situation like this really does show the hypocrisy. And the only one thing I'd like to add as well is that a lot of people who are the advocates of freedoms, and especially when it comes to insulting, I'm not just going to say Islam, I'm going to say insulting other people, or even insulting other religions. People depict Prophet Jesus in a very negative way as well. People who promote these, they should be the ones now that should be questioning people like Macron and other cases, where why is it that when it comes down to certain people, the rules are different, and when it comes to the people in power and authority, the rules are different.
You know what's quite interesting though, Maj? One thing that is interesting is a lot of the mainstream media did highlight this hypocrisy. So when I was reading like articles, that normally if you read articles from like Muslim kind of countries, or kind of any articles from anybody who has an Islamic background, then they highlight the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and obviously these disgusting caricatures. However, this time I noticed even the likes of Reuters, even the likes of some of the American media stations, whenever they mentioned this same story, they and obviously they had to, because it's so blatant, they also mentioned the hypocrisy, or maybe they didn't use the word hypocrisy, but they mentioned that how is this any different to the caricatures depicting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in the past we were saying that Muslims were saying this, Muslims were exposing this hypocrisy and the irony, whereas this time it's not just Muslims, everybody's saying it. Even that person himself, the guy who put the billboard up, he himself made a comment. He said in his tweet, he says, in Macron land, showing the Prophet's rear is satire, making fun of Macron as a dictator is blasphemy. So he himself identified the hypocrisy in this. But this is what I find quite interesting, is that what you're noticing is, France is an interesting case, is because, the Enlightenment period, the Renaissance, all of these things are significantly linked to France. So they are the ones, they're the carriers of la cité and things like they say, and they are the ones that hold on to these freedoms stronger than anybody else. So that's why you do get this kind of, people doing these cartoons and satire and, calling out the government and stuff in France more than some other places. But now they're letting people do that. And, you know, when they do it themselves with these caricatures, what they're doing is they're putting out there something they want to do, but then the population gets emboldened by that. So the population go, okay, well, if you're allowed to put, put pictures of the Prophet Muhammad or caricatures and these things of the Prophet Muhammad on buildings, then why can't we do the same with you? So it's actually creating a problem within their own societies, because it's highlighting the backwardness of this idea of freedoms even more, which in the past was easily kind of, people would just leave it and go, okay, well, if Islam isn't involved, actually we can just get away with it. But now it's the Muslims actually stepping up and saying something, whereas maybe the Christians might not have said as much when it was Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Then you're seeing this difference, and I think that is only a detriment to these liberal ideas.
Yeah, that's actually quite promising that you said that. What do you think, JK?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with that. I think that, what it highlights to me is that liberalism itself is quite unnatural. So a lot of, when it comes to, we said at the start when, all the things were happening with the cartoons or depictions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that, if we did this about your mother or if we did it about yourself, you'd find it offensive. And, naturally anyone would find it offensive. It's a natural reaction to be offended by if someone, depicts you in a certain way or insults your mother. Everyone knows you don't need to be of a certain background. It's a natural reaction to be offended. But what I'm saying is liberalism itself allows anything and everything. So it will cause their own destruction. And we've seen it, like even, for example, watching the Olympics, and you can see that, there's a clear difference between men and women. But actually their liberalism actually promotes the idea that there's no difference between genders, everything's fluid. So but it's unnatural. So with Macron being offended by this, it's a natural reaction to be offended. But it's they who say that you shouldn't be offended. It's they who say that everything should be acceptable, everything is freedom of expression. We don't
That's
say
funny.
that.
Yeah, that's true.
We've got
Macron
all
has
of
every
that.
right to be offended, doesn't he? Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, they're depicting him as Hitler. So, you
Exactly.
can understand it.
I totally understand why he's offended. But you're the one that said you're not offended. You guys are the ones that say you're not offended by this stuff. So like kind of eat your own, medicine. And that's kind of that kind of
You could,
angle.
like you say, you can't have your cake and eat it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And to be honest with you, I think you know what, if Macron is having a bit of a bad time at the moment, he's got all these protests against him, and and all the stuff that's kicking off in the background, and maybe he just let down his guard, and afterwards he must have been kicking himself, thinking, oh my god, what did I do that for? But it is what it is. But there's some good things that you guys have said coming out of it, where people are actually questioning now, where this basis of freedom, why is there differences, and why does it apply to certain people and other people is just used to insult them and degrade them and also so that was really good, man. Inshallah, I think I want to move on to the next segment, if you guys are happy with that.
Cool.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, cool, man. So yeah, subhanallah, we see last week or so, it's been big things kicking off in North Africa, in Tunisia. What we've seen is the President Kais Saied, Tunisian president, on the 25th of July, which was actually last Sunday. He chose to freeze parliament, and he revoked the immunity of all the parliamentarians, and he dismissed Prime Minister Hisham Mechachi, if that's how you pronounce it, and also he assumed personally all executive powers. And also we found out a bit later that the Prime Minister, Hisham Mechachi, he was actually beaten up, and he was forced to accept the president move, and also handing his resignation or basically just leaving his position. Right now, this is a messy situation. Many people are calling this a coup, but I've got a few questions which I want to ask you guys and get your opinions on when it comes to this issue in Tunisia, right? So my first question is that Tunisia, in the news, it's always portrayed as the success story of the Arab Spring, right? This is where it all began, where the guy, he commit suicide, he burnt himself, and that this is where there's actually been a success from a democratic point of view, right? Now, however, what we see is that since the Arab Spring up until now, we see that there's been so many problems. Okay, so many problems. So it's nothing new what happened last week, right? And even though that the West always tries to push this narrative that Tunisia stands as the Arab Spring's lone success story, 10 years after the uprising began, the reality on the ground is that a different picture is drawn, right? Especially when it comes down to the reality of democracy and the people, what they've accepted. Now, why do you guys think that Tunisia hasn't become like a secular democratic country in the way that the West reports, in the way that it was said that the people who uprose against Zain al-Abidine, the president, I'm sure his name was Zain al-Abidine, they rose against him because they was it Ben Ali?
Ben Ali, yeah, wasn't it?
Ben Ali, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
well, it was one of those guys who they rose up against him because they wanted democracy, they wanted secularism, etc. So, what do you guys think? Why has it not turned out like this, and why do we still see problems in Tunisia 10 years after the Arab Springs began?
If you're someone, and I think a lot of people thought this is not a criticism, but a lot of people fall into this category. If you're someone who believed or was duped into thinking that what happened in Tunisia and then what happened in Egypt and many places in the Middle East was a genuine Arab Spring revolution, then I think you are going to be quite a little bit confused by why the turn of events in Tunisia are going down the route that they're going down. Because I think a lot of people, and certainly mainstream media, and continues to do to this day, highlights what happened in Tunisia and then in Egypt and then in Syria and all the other places where the so-called Arab Spring happened, highlight them as actual revolutions that were completely natural, that were completely uninstigated by external forces, as in they think they were completely proper revolutions from the people on the ground. Anybody who does any reading, or maybe anybody who reads beyond the narrative of mainstream media, reads into alternative media, reads into some of the youth movements that were instigated by America in Muslim lands, will actually know that what happened in Tunisia and then in other Muslim lands was an instigated these revolutions. They were Western planted movements that steered these uprisings. So whilst there were people that were genuinely discontent with the leaderships, they were steered by the West and the colonialist plots. And that then links to your question in Tunisia, because this is the thing, anybody who studies revolutions historically will see that revolutions, what happens is the people on the ground have a certain desire, have a certain want, they want to go against certain power structures, and a natural revolution leads to the people on the ground becoming people in positions of power. So what you have is you have an alignment between the masses and you have an alignment with the leadership. So what that does is it leads to a genuine revolution, such that over a period of time, what the people want, as long as it's not completely kind of hijacked and things afterwards. And personally, I don't think a genuine revolution can be hijacked, by the way. But as long as you have this alignment between the people who are a part of the revolution and then the leaders who come from that revolution, then you see a revolution. What you saw in Tunisia is actually it was instigated. So this even democracy, so-called succeeding there, was false. So now you're seeing the fruits of that. What you're seeing today is the fruits of something that wasn't evolution, was actually steered by America as the main instigator. And therefore, that's why we're seeing a failure in even democracy. and we know that democracy is flawed from its root. But what we're seeing is further failure on the basis that actually what the people carry, or the majority of people carry, is not the same as what those people who are puppets and are controlled by some of these Western powers. And that's why we're seeing some of the now all of the the more uprisings that are happening there, and more disunity and discord, personally, in my opinion.
Okay, subhanallah, you've said so much there. I'm sure Jake is going to add to that, and I'm going to add to what you said there, or even ask you some more questions, because you've mentioned some really interesting points there. But before we go to that, Rash, I'm just going to play this comment.
Hey guys, I really enjoyed this session so far, right? But I'm gonna have to go. I will join next time, inshallah. I really enjoyed listening to this. I thought you guys are gonna be some kind of mess up, and I was ready to troll you guys as well. See you.
Alhamdulillah.
Well, subhanallah, we got saved from the trolling, man. But now, respect, inshallah. Hopefully, we'd love to get your views on the next one, bro. Yeah, thanks for your comments and for the time you've been able to spend on the show. Yeah, JK, what are you saying, man? I think Rash has opened up a box of dynamite, man. What were you saying about that?
Yeah, I mean, just taking it back to principles in terms of what happened in Tunisia. So like you said, a lot of commentators have said that there's a coup that's happened in Tunisia against the prime minister, against the ruling faction, ruling authority, and that's what really I want to touch on, that this so-called model democracy and kind of the fruit of the Arab Spring, quote unquote Arab Spring, shows that this now shows that that was all a fallacy. That was not true. That was false, because what they've done here is that just because what's his name? Said, what's the guy's name? Said Qais, is it?
Yeah, Qais Said.
Qais Said, sorry. He's now kind of come out and kind of sacked the prime minister, and like you said, he's even got beaten up as well, apparently. It really shows that democracy only lasts until it's kind of aiding the West and aiding America and those who are kind of controlling the scenes in the background. Because when it came to Tunisia, it was meant to be, a nation for the people. And now that we see, the concept of democracy is sold to us as this universal idea that everyone believes in it, everyone believes it to be the right thing. And it's not a kind of Western thing, or it's sold to be that every nation wants an authority that is based on democracy. But as much, I think we need to go back to the idea of what this is. What is democracy? It's not a universal idea. It's something that comes out of the civilization of the West, as well as other ideas such as capitalism and socialism, and it isn't founded in Islam. So these parties that used democracy to come to power, like Ennahda, the Ennahda party, who's the Rashid Ghannouchi, who's the leader, have now been kind of asked to, take a very bitter pill, because now they know that at any point in time they were able to be removed, as what happened. So what does that really tell us about democracy? And it draws comparisons with what happened in Egypt when Morsi came to power. The President Morsi. So the comparison that I'm making here is that, we can only do so much through the democratic framework. Morsi got there, but because they didn't want him and they saw a threat in what he was saying, they removed him, and Sisi did the coup against him. Now here, even though the Islamic Party, or so-called Islamic Party of Ennahda, were very liberal, they even came out and accepted lots of these liberal secular laws. They also spoke about how Islam was meant to be fluid and free and work with the times and all of this, but very pragmatic. Even now, they've been removed from their position, or going to be removed from their position. So for me, it really shows that real change is not through the democratic framework. Real change is radical. Real change is when we uproot the existing system and replace it with a true radical transformation. And for us, that's Islam. And Islam won't rise from the dirt of democracy. Islam needs to be kind of planted as a pure idea, and it can't be, we can't work through any of these frameworks, because when you do, as this has highlighted, as the case of Egypt has highlighted, you're in their hands. They will move the parts like you're just a pawn in the game of chess. What we really need to do is lift the whole chessboard and radically change that situation so that you're in control. And I think for me, that's one of the key lessons of what Rash was saying about democracy, and how it really shows the weakness of this idea and the falsehood in the idea of democracy.
Yeah, I like that you've linked the Egypt situation, and I think that does add to what I was saying earlier. That linking Egypt and Tunisia is very pertinent, because this idea that working from within the same, that framework of democracy is somehow going to instigate change, and somehow is going to breed for Muslims something better than what was before. I think a lot of Muslims are coming to the realization. I think I even read earlier on, again, I'm not sure how much of this I can get evidence for, but someone was saying that there was members of the Ahnatha who have come out and said, you know what, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have worked through the political system. There were brothers that were saying, you need, like you said, radical transformation. You need to uproot the system. You can't, use gradualism or purely being a party, an Islamic party within a non-Islamic framework. That just isn't going to work. Other people who said it wasn't going to work and told us and warned us, we should have listened to them. So apparently some of the brothers in the Ahnatha party have said that, but I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if that's true, because once these kind of things happen and a coup happens like this, then you realize, wait there a minute, this democratic framework has checks and balances in that won't allow us to Islamify it or change it to our own benefit. It will always be there for the benefit of those people who designed that system.
Yeah, and I mean, Nahda, they, to put it lightly, they bent over backwards, accepting everything. I think a lot of them you can't even consider them to be an Islamic party with some of the stuff that they really pushed forward. So it really shows that even after all of those concessions and giving in and compromising, they've been removed. Yeah, so what does that really tell you?
The Muslim Brotherhood didn't go to the lengths that these guys went to.
No, they didn't. Exactly.
Yeah, no, some really good points, man. And like JK said as well, I think another interesting point is that the way it's made out is, democracy is like a universal system, and it's the most natural system for the whole world. But the reality is that in the places where you see democracy being implemented, and it has been for a long time, even in those societies, you have very low election turnouts, and people are disillusioned with the system. But it's the arrogance that you can think that we like this model of ruling, but you know what? It's not just us. We want everyone to be following this ruling as well. But the point is not everyone is the same, and certainly when it comes to Muslims and Islam, we see that Muslims have their own way of life, and if they do want to, like you guys have mentioned, like Al Nahda, if they do want to fit in and be relevant along democratic lines, then they will cease to be who they were originally when they joined. That's the system, and we see Al Nahda, and at the end of it, what was their reward? And I'm not surprised that there are people from within Al Nahda who are going to be Islamically minded people who now are regretting their whole involvement in all of this, because after bending over backwards, after changing so much of Islam, like JK said, but you're not even an Islamic group anymore, what did they receive at the end of it? They got booted out. It's like, what was the point of it? But one point another question I want to ask you guys, and I think this is also really important as well, because what we see is that in this issue, what's happening in Tunisia, right? There is and there always has been external interference. Okay, so this incident again shows, there's external interference, whether it's via America, whether it's via France, right? And we see that they continue to interfere in Muslim lands. Now, if you look at how the West portrays the Muslim lands in North Africa, wherever, it's always seen as backwards, corrupt places. People are incapable of ruling for themselves. Certainly when it comes to North Africa, they're seen as places where people just want to get on a dinghy and try to cross the Mediterranean and live the amazing life in the West, right? It's always shown like this. But if you look, it's almost to dig deeper, you can see that the tentacles of the Western governments, right, they're deep inside these countries, deep inside the what you would call the deep state as well. So, do you think that certainly the citizens of countries in the West, that they should be demanding an explanation from their leaders and their governments about their continued interference in the Muslim lands, especially the fact that they will wage war there. They depict them as just refugees and so. But when you dig deeper, it actually shows that, in fact, majority of the problems are actually instigated by from the White House or from Downing Street or from wherever in Paris, right? Don't you think like people really in this modern time where we've got access to so much information, don't you think people should be more vocal about why is it that you say these people are incapable of living according to the way they want to live, yet at every stage there's interference in them trying to live in the way they want to live. Well, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right there.
Yeah,
Go on,
you go,
Raf.
JK.
No, all I was going to say is I think you're right. There is this kind of inferiority complex where they view themselves as the ones that know best. So the Western idea that they are the leaders of the world and everyone else are savages and they need to be put right through their systems, and whatever they say is good and righteous, whereas whatever the others do is barbaric and backwards. But like you said, history testifies that they are the ones that are barbaric and they're the ones that committed the atrocities in these lands under the colonial rule, where they directly colonized these lands. For example, Tunisia and the French, what they did there. But now the neo-colonialism that you spoke about and neo-imperialism, where they're controlling these lands from afar. And the irony is that when it came to these nations' independence, quote unquote independence, they got their flags, they got the national anthems, and said, "Look, this is your country, Tunisia. You got your red flag or whatever it was. You're now independent." But the reality is that there's no independence there. They remain to be slaves of the Western nations, whether it was France initially as the colonizers, but now today is the US and the majority of the world who control these lands through their own kind of puppet rulers. There was no independence. They remain fully dependent on these, and I'm not talking about the people. The people are separate. I'm talking about the leaderships of these countries who have basically sold off the land and continue to do so by playing agency to America and serving them their masters basically. So I think the point I'm saying is that we should highlight to whether it be from this country or even Muslims in their own countries, should highlight to the rulers and the Western rulers as well, that why is it that you continue to be kind of colonizing these lands, even though it may not be a direct sort of colonization, but it's indirect. In this case of Tunisia, we haven't really talked about some of the political tentacles that we see in the background, but there were so many players involved in what's happening there. Not just the West, but even other nations that the West utilize, such as the UAE, in causing the situation. And even back when Rash was speaking about the Arab Spring, a lot of nations were involved in really orchestrating some of these events to the favor of the West. So we need to be aware of this, and we shouldn't have this view that the West are, it's all a place of honey and gold and honey and milk, and we need to, look up to them. We don't. They are the oppressors. They continue to be oppressing our lands and continue to have this kind of control over our lands. And we need to, again, take our true independence by removing our shackles from the West.
No, top points, man. Rush, you want to add anything on that? Or are you okay with that?
Only just that one little thing that JK was saying about one of the terms he used, I think is worth anybody listening further looking into: neo-imperialism. And I know you're going to ask a little bit about the situation in Iraq as well, and it's linked to that really. It's that we're moving away from direct. Well, we've been moving away from direct colonialism from a while, haven't we? Where these Western nations, your Americas, your Britons, your France, previously directly colonized these lands, but just because those lands have got independence, this new form of imperialism is all about being able to control these places, their resources, their strategic decisions, using them from afar. And we're about to now see the same is happening in Afghanistan, and we're about to see the same in Iraq. What the powers, the world superpowers, have realized is actually, be it direct colonialism, be it direct invasion, those things are very costly. It's actually, we can achieve our same interests and our same goals and objectives by doing them from afar, using our people from within, and that's what they're doing, and that's what you would call neo-imperialism, and it continues to this day. So I think that's a fantastic point that JK made.
Yeah, no, definitely, man, definitely. Okay, let's move on to the next segment then. Well, it's a bit different to what we've been discussing so far, and this is something which, to me, when I read this, it came as a shock. But then, actually, I was shocked that I was shocked. Knowing what we know, right? But it was
I kind of see where you're going. That's quite an interesting way to look at it. But I do see what you mean. You shouldn't be surprised, but you're surprised at first. Yeah, I
was surprised that I was surprised. You know what I mean, right? So it was a report about hundreds of children face decades of sexual abuse in care homes in the UK, right? I was reading this report, and it further said that the numbers actually, the numbers we know anyway, will go into thousands, hundreds of thousands, right? But it said that the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse has found over 700 former residents made allegations of sexual assault, rape, and other forms of abuse at only 3 children homes in London's Lambeth district, right? So this report is only in three homes. Children who complained about mistreatment were dismissed, and only 1 staff member was disciplined in a span of over 40 years. Now, this, as a father, I've got kids and stuff like that, and already, when you read about children who are living in shelters or living in care homes or homeless centers, it's heartbreaking anyway, right? It's bad as it is not having parents and so on, right? But now when this stuff comes out that these people were being sexually abused by the people who are running these places and so on, this is something which, like I said, to me, it was like really, really, really hit me to the core, to the sense like, look, how can people be going through this, especially in the West, in the UK, where it's supposed to be, like we just mentioned, JK just mentioned not longer, that it's beamed to the world as being the most advanced civilized places in the world, right? What are your thoughts on this story, guys?
So just to give a bit of, I only came across this, a few days ago, to be fair. And if anybody who reads into the detail, it's disgusting. It's really, some of the things, like children under the age of 5 being put into foster families who had, were known paedophiles or were subsequently found, weren't investigated properly. There were stories of children in these care homes, like you say, where they were being sexually abused, with other children in the other room being able to hear them. It was disgusting. Some of the stuff that's come out is absolutely disgusting. And at first, you go, okay, look, how many people may have exaggerated this or something like that. I will tell you that this is probably an under exaggeration, from the basis that I know people who worked in these kind of fields in the council, right, and these things are still happening today. They're talking about these being back in the 60s. These things are still happening today. We just don't hear about them. Doctors regularly mention that these things are happening. People come to them and say, these are the things that I've gone through, and because of doctor-patient confidentiality and stuff, these things don't get out. There's someone, I won't mention it because again they're sworn to not talk about these things outside of their work field, but when they come across these stories in their line of work and line of inquiry, some of the things are disgusting what is happening in these societies. So like you said, you're shocked at it because you think, oh, you don't see it out there, it's not public, so you think it can't happen. But actually then you're shocked, like you said, you're surprised. Why should we be surprised? Because actually, in this society, women and children, this is the beauty of Islam. Islam recognizes that children and women are the vulnerable amongst the human race. And the reason why I'm mentioning Islam at this stage is because it recognizes the vulnerability of those. It puts systems in place to protect them. What we see in like this example that we're talking about now is it was supposed to be the authorities that look after these children, because these are children, remember, without parents. A lot of them are ones where they're in care, they're orphans or whatever. They're the most vulnerable in society. And yet the people who were responsible for them, these governments and these local councils, rather than even doing any investigation about where they're putting these children, they actually use them as political pawns because of the conflict between, at the time, this was the Thatcher was in charge, I think, and there was a lot of conflict between the different parties, and they actually used some of this just as political point scoring, rather than coming forward and going, it's mad. And this is children actually suffering, and this is just the people who have come out and confessed to it. What about all of those people who probably went through all of that and are too embarrassed to open up now and say, you know what, when I was this years old, I was in this place and I was sexually abused? How many people are even going to be willing to come out with that? So the numbers and the seriousness of it is so much higher. So the fact that this stuff happened then and continues to happen is actually shows this Western civilization from the point of view of their values as well, and not just from a system point of view, the councils and their responsibility, but even look at how many individuals must have been involved for that many people to come out and say that, how bad it is paedophilia within their societies, that this many children, well, adults now, but people who were children back then, have come out and said, I was sexually abused. How big a problem is that? And now at the same time, you're trying to promote bloody transgenderism and LGBTQ and all of this rubbish. Yet look at the situation. Whereas when it comes to Islam, we recognize that children and women are the vulnerable in society. So we make sure that people's ideas and the way they think conforms to not exploiting the vulnerable in society, and knowing the result of that. It's sinful. You're going to go to hell, even if you act upon any incorrect thoughts you have. But also, if you have Islam from a governmental point of view, it makes sure it protects orphans, it protects women who might be vulnerable. And what you're seeing here is the complete.
I think I think you're right. You just broke up there for a second, man. Just repeat your last point, mate. Just repeat your last point.
I was just saying, it just highlights how this society doesn't protect the vulnerable. The fact that this kind of stuff is continuing till today, it highlights that the Western system and the framework doesn't protect the vulnerable in society. Whereas if we take an opportunity to discuss how Islam dealt with the vulnerable in society, we don't see these kind of problems.
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. So really hard hitting points there, bro. JK, what you gotta say?
Yeah, I mean, when I heard the story as well, I had a similar feeling. Like, just it makes you angry. No matter how unsurprising it is, it's still, because end of the day, this is children who suffered and probably continue to suffer as adults now through what they went through. Why? Because they weren't protected by a body that was meant to protect them. Literally, they went into these homes for protection. They probably would have served better just living outside and doing probably not, but you know what I mean. Like they went to a place where they were meant to be protected and they weren't protected, and so it does make your blood boil when you hear some of these stories. And it's the tip of the iceberg, really. These are the stories that have come out. There's so much underground that happens that's either covered up or evidence has been destroyed, so it will never ever come out. And it's just very inherent in their society, in their systems, for stuff like this to happen. And I think for me, one thing that I've always heard in the back, one of the arguments that their thinkers make is that they have progressed. So for them, because they are the latest, for them time is a measure of progress. So because they exist now and they progress for way beyond when Islam was first revealed, they view themselves as the ones who are progressive and know better than anyone, because they've got this science and technological advancements and all of this. The fact that we're talking like this in itself shows that technology has advanced. But progress is not about that. Like progress of thinking, progress of morality and doing what's right is not based on technological advancement or time. And like if you compare back to previous to Islam, before Islam, things like this happened where you had, for example, the Arabs used to bury their daughters alive. There was, some of the relationships between men and women were disgusting. And you find that now after Islam, or devoid of Islam, you have similar things that happen in their societies where you have this, pedophilia, you have the abuse of the genders and all of this crap that's going on right now. It really shows that it's not about time. Progress is about what your source is and what the source you take being the truth. So when it comes to this the story that I heard about the children being abused, I wasn't surprised, but I've, like Rash was saying, I've spoken to a lot of friends that I know that work in like with children, work in the hospital service, and they say it's inherent in most households, but we just don't know it. And the difference here, though, is that it really highlights that even the authorities are involved in this. So what does that tell you about their system? And like we said before, this is the system that they try to share with the Muslim lands, and they try to promote as being the best thing since sliced bread. But things like this really show that is this the system that the world needs, or is it something else that provides justice? And that's where we need to understand the Islamic system. Islam protects women, and Islam protects children. And contrary to what they claim Islam to be as barbaric and promotes abuse against women and all of this propaganda against Islam, the evidence suggests that it's they who have the countless evidence against them. If you put both systems in court and put the evidence, their table would be full of evidence against crimes and immorality. And I think the reason is that they are not actors for humanity, or they're not moral. For them, it's purely about interest. And that's why, as Rash was saying, they use some of this for political gain. Because, for them, it's not about whether they can protect children or not. They're purely doing it for their own interests, whether it be their physical interest of abusing these children, but or political power and things like this. So it really highlights that capitalism is this cancer that shows that children aren't even protected in the system, women aren't protected, and really highlights not only Muslims are in need of Islam, but the whole of humankind, the whole of mankind, including the so-called progressive West.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like you said about capitalism, and we were speaking about liberalism. The thing is, you see, is that when you have no boundaries, where you're always, things are evolving, there's change. You see that relationships, everything can change. Relationships can change and whatever. So the thing is what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, and this is something which I remember reading an article by David Cameron, and he was talking about this, that there's an over sexualization of children. So you just look at toys now. Whether I know you guys will be familiar with Bratz. You used to have these toys with these like girls, female toys were meant to be really the in thing. Some of the costumes or some of the stuff they wore, it was not suitable for children. And even when there's been these discussions of teaching children, as young as 4 or 5 in schools to do with issues to do with sex education and so on, a lot of the concerns that parents have had, and this is not just Muslims, this is like just across the board, is that the innocence is being lost in the child, right? They don't need to know these things. But what you're seeing now is you're seeing this promotion where basically anything goes. So now when you have people in a position of authority, whether it's someone in a care home or a foster home, right? So they have the authority now over this vulnerable individual, okay? They have no accountability. They're not thinking about their next life. They're not thinking about, okay, I haven't got CCTVs in my camera, so that, in my house, they're not worried about a next life that they'll be held accountable. To them, anything goes. And also on top of that, just to add, is that they also not worried about the authorities above them, i.e. to do with the councils and all that, because they don't care. Now imagine in such a toxic environment, and also the over-sexualization of children and women, this is gonna come to a stage where people will then, because of the situation and the vulnerable people they find that themselves having authority over, they do what they like, and this is the result.
I'm glad you made that point, because sometimes it's a bit unfair. Because these people who are foster carers today, or even back then, and these care homes and stuff, some of them do such amazing work. These are people who are willing to commit their time. And I'm not talking Muslims here. Many of some of the best carers of children, certainly in the UK, the vast majority of them are probably non-Muslim. Yeah,
definitely, man. Definitely.
Care for they even taken in Syrian, because we've had in our communities, haven't we? People come out and say, why isn't more Muslim people coming forward and taking care of some of these Syrian children that have come across and they lost their parents in the war? Yeah. So some of the people looking after them are people who are really, really nice people who have looked after children and have not, definitely. It's not like you can tarnish them with what we're talking about here today.
No way.
But I'm glad you mentioned what you do, because it highlights the fact that what's happened is this sexualization of the whole of society has meant that, yes, you can definitely you criticize and blame this government, this council that we're talking about, who let all of this happen. But if in society there's so much paedophilia in society, or there are so much people, say there's 10 applications to foster a child and 9 of them have some kind of child sex abuse, some kind of background or something. Even those councils are in a situation where if they don't do some next level of investigation, they might not find out. How do they know that one of the families they're putting their children into isn't the father isn't a paedophile or something like that? How do they know that someone who's employed in one of these care homes slips through the net when it comes to these CRB checks and things like that? It's difficult. So it's not even like saying, it's so easy, why didn't you spot this? Even though the level of how bad they did a job is significant. But say they did a half decent job, still children can slip through the net. But the reason that there's so much of this in the society is your point, I think, in my opinion, is the hypersexualization of society. When you have all of these TV programs and you have pornography industry, billion dollar pornography industry, all of the liberal society which says your sensual gratification is what is the be all and end all, what else do you expect? What else do you expect? So they're questioning these councils. Why aren't they questioning their own way of life? It's their way of life that leads to this. So a much longer conversation. I'm not going to go on about that, but certainly it's something for a discussion for another time. Is what less you should be questioning your own systems, not just these authorities that failed.
Yeah, and they always try to make out like this was like a remote incident, or But the reality is, it happens all the time. Even there was a report about the French university, and this is like a big-time university, right? It's called Sciences Po. And what I was reading this report, and it said that it's ignored dozens of allegations of rape and sexual assault. This is according to a report ordered by the Ministry of Education after claims that there is a culture of rape at the university. Culture of rape. It's like... this is man. But like you said, Rash, the point you made there is, if you create such an atmosphere, if you, for example, if you keep, if you have, I mean, look, this might be a weird type of example, but let me try to give you one. So if you've got like, a situation where you really starve these lions and really starve these lions and then, you put them amongst people or put them amongst steaks or whatever, right? Then the ultimate is going to happen where then their nature is that they're hungry, they're going to eat, right? You wouldn't say, oh, well, what evil thing, because it's expected. It's expected even if it wasn't hungry, right? It's a lion.
Well, we see it in India. You see it in India, don't you? India is known as the rape capital of the world. Why is
Delhi, madness, yeah.
Why is it? Because they hypersexualize their society. Bollywood and Hollywood over there is at next level, and what they should. So you've created that. Okay, you can blame one individual for going and doing something he shouldn't do, and he is the one who's ultimately accountable. But someone has to be blamed for creating the whole environment, surely.
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%, man. But guys, listen. There was a few more stories which we need to cover, but time is of the essence, I would say. So I think it's going to be a good place to end the weekly roundup. Inshallah, if there's stuff which we can bring back in next week. I mean, Rash, I know you mentioned about the America, saying that they're leaving Iraq, and even JK earlier
to be
on.
fair, that's going to be something that, as a story, only gets more meat on the bone over the course of the week. So actually, maybe that is a good one to hold fire until next week.
Yeah. JK earlier on, he was telling me about there was a case where a Saudi Arabian judoka, if that's how you actually pronounce it, actually held up and clasped hands with the Israeli judoka, judo practitioner, and the reason why I want to mention this very, very, very quickly, because it was a spicy topic, is the fact that you might think, okay, they're in sports, what's the big deal? But if you know, in the last week or so, a couple of other athletes refused to. They actually left the Olympics because they refused to face up against an Israeli fighter, a judo person, because of their point of the fact that they don't recognize them and because of solidarity with the Palestinian Muslims. But it just goes to show that there's more to it, where you have a Saudi Arabian athlete doing this. But listen, I'm not going to bring this to you. I'm not going to let you guys comment on this because we'll be here for a long time because there's so much spice in that. And maybe, to be honest with you, probably the Olympics are going to be still going on next week. We can probably bring that one up, right? So, guys, inshallah, listen, Jazakallah khair for joining me, man. It really is. It was really good talking to you guys, and you guys made some amazing points and stuff that actually I'm going to reflect on now because there was so much in there. So much of the points you made were so powerful. So yeah, Jazakallah for all the listeners as well, and for anyone who made any comments. Anything, guys, you guys want to end? Anything you guys want to say to the listeners before we end?
No, not really. No, I'm just enjoying having these discussions every week. There's always so much good news to talk about, and
good news.
Well, okay, good news.
I don't know if it's good news.
Good topics of this.
Saucy news.
Yeah, true. I don't know about good news, but yeah, no, 100%, man. Let's keep this going, man. But listen, guys, respect. It's Maghrib time. We gotta pray Salah, inshallah. So I'll speak to you guys soon. Yeah, Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.